Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast. Life looks different now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 33. And from reading Genesis chapter 33, we learned that Jacob and Esau reunited. And what is the most beautiful thing in this chapter is the fact that Esau forgave Jacob. After this, Jacob's betrayal, after Jacob stealing Esau's birthright, after 20 years of being estranged with one another, Esau forgave Jacob. The brothers wept together, they hugged on each other, and they talked about old times. Then we learned that Esau asked Jacob to come with him back to the land of Seir where Esau lived. However, Jacob was commended by God to go to Canaan, to go to Bethel, specifically in Canaan. But Jacob was very cautious on turning down Esau. He didn't just say to Esau, I'm not going back with you. He just simply said to Esau that the animals need to be rested. His children were young, they were tired, need to be rested, and that he will follow Esau later on, and Esau can just go ahead. However, we then learned that Jacob did not tell the truth. Jacob did not follow Esau. Jacob did not go to the land of Seir. Instead, Jacob went the opposite of where the land of Seir is. He camped away from the land of Canaan, around the area near the land of Canaan, in a city named Shechem. Now, this week, we are going to read Genesis chapter 34. And Genesis chapter 34 holds a very important message. It is a very good chapter to learn from, and hopefully all of us will keep that lesson in mind. So stay tuned to us reading together Genesis chapter 34. Now, before we go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 34, I have a favor to ask. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. As you and I are learning the Word of God, others want to do the same. So please like and share the channel with others and allow the channel to grow. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Now let's get on to reading together Genesis chapter 34. The defiling of Dinah. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry. because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by laying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price, and give as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that will be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone. The words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of this city. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and whatever wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My number is of you, and if they gather together against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, but they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Wow. Genesis chapter 34 is tragic. You know, the book of Genesis it really is a hard, a very difficult book to read. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many things that transpire in this book, you know, from the fall of Adam and Eve to, you know, Noah's Ark, with God destroying the whole planet with a flood, because we were just so wicked. Human beings are just so wicked. And to God choosing, you know, Abraham to be the one to have a covenant with, you know, and even God, you know, choosing to save Lot, you know, in Genesis chapter 19, because of the covenant that God had with Abraham. You know, there's so many things that happened, but this chapter here is another chapter reminding us of our nature as human beings. Now, you see, the chapter opened with letting us know that some time has passed. Now, we have to remember in Genesis chapter 33, Jacob and Esau made up, you know, and Esau invited Jacob to come with him to the land of Seir, to be with him for a while, to be his guest for a while. And Jacob lied to Esau. Jacob said he would follow Esau. When Jacob chose not to follow Esau, he went in the opposite direction. And he went and lived near Canaan, but in the city of Shechem. So Jacob did not go to the land where God had called him to go to. God had commended Jacob to go to Canaan, and specifically in the city of Bethel, where God had already promised Abraham that whole land. But God specifically called Jacob to go back and be in Bethel, to build an altar there for the Lord. But Jacob chose to live in the city of Shechem. I'm sure he had his reasons. It could have been because he's a businessman, and living near a city means you can trade, you can do business, you can do different things. Jacob came close to where God wanted him to be, but not quite. For his own reason, he chose to stay in the city of Shechem. And we learn some time has passed. Dinah, the daughter that Jacob had with Leah, went out and about visiting the women of the land of Shechem. And while she's visiting the women of the land, the prince of the city of Shechem, who happened to be named Shechem himself, saw Dinah. He basically grabbed her and raped her. He defiled this young woman. Now, make no mistake, it was a rape. I've heard pastors preach on this passage before. I've heard pastors say that, you know, the text doesn't necessarily say that Dinah was raped. It could have been that these two, you know, young people were in love with one another, and, you know, Dinah was sneaking around, and you know, she went with her boyfriend and she laid with him. I can assure you, these people are gravely mistaken. I know they're pastors, forgive me, you know, I know they're supposed to know it all. But listen, the text makes it very clear. The language here is very clear that this was not consensual. You know, that it was not a seduction, but a violation. This young woman was violated. And Shechem became obsessed with Dinah. And this rape ignited a series of tragic actions. But I couldn't help but wonder, first of all, why Jacob chose to stay, first of all, in that city of Shechem when God already told him to go back to Bethel. I just cannot understand, for the life of me, I cannot understand why Jacob chose to disobey God in that sense. And yes, clearly he chose to live in the city of Shechem because he's trying to do his own business. I get it. But that was not the land that God had promised to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. You see, that's not the region where God wanted him to be. He brought his family to a region where God did not want him to be in. And to make matters worse, we're reading here that this young woman, Dinah, did not have any protection. There was no one around her. So we have to then ask the question, why was she left there unsupervised? Now we're talking about them living in a city where people are immoral, where promiscuity is normal, where prostitution is okay, right? These behaviors are normal. Like, the question is, why was Dinah left unsupervised? Which didn't tell me that Jacob did not take his job as the leader of that home, of his people, seriously. There's definitely a lack there. Because as a father, that's what fathers do. Fathers protect their children. You make sure your children are safe, especially your daughters, in a time and living in a city where you know that people are immoral. Then I have to ask, where was Leah? Why would a mother allow her daughter to go out to meet the women of a city with no chaperone? This was, a perfect storm, really. Parents who fail to do what they are supposed to do to protect their children, tend to have to suffer the consequences of these actions. Now, not only did Dinah have to suffer the consequence of the failure of her parents to supervise her, we seeing that Jacob, his sons, and everyone else involved in this situation also have to pay for a price for this, for that mistake. Jacob had no business staying in Shechem. In a way, he harmed his own family. He chose to stay in that place for the wrong reason. And then we have to remember, that story kind of reminds me of the story of Lot in Genesis chapter, 19. When we go back to read, to that video where Lot chose to live in Sodom and Gomorrah, to live near there because he was a businessman. He wanted to do business. These cities were flourishing. He chose to live there for all the wrong reasons, putting his own family in danger, and he ended up losing his whole family to the process. It is really shameful. But God, in his grace, here is going to redeem Jacob. But it's clear he failed to supervise and protect his daughter. The first time I read this chapter, in fact, I think my dad read it to us, and he explained what really transpired here. One thing I know for sure is that, when I was growing up, my father was extremely overprotective of us children because, I grew up without a mother. So my dad was very strict. I, as a young, girl, was never allowed to be anywhere unsupervised because my dad always, he always knew. And he always said that. He even used that passage to say, no, you guys are girls. I'm one of 3 girls. My dad never allowed me to go out and about meeting friends and doing things without any supervision. It was a big fat no. And as I got older, I understood why he did that. And I practiced exactly the same thing with my own children. because you can never be too careful with people. And here we are learning this young woman was out socializing with no protection in an immoral land. Craziness. Craziness. And this young man took her and raped her, and he became obsessed with her. And we can see here, he cared so much about her, he went to his father and demanded that his father talk to Dinah's dad, to Jacob, and get her as his wife. Now we can say, oh, well, he loved her. If he didn't love her, he would not have married her. Listen, he raped her. That's not love. It's lust, but it's not love. Because when you love someone, you don't harm them. You don't hurt them. You don't do anything to defile them. And that's what this young man did. So that is not love. But then he demanded to marry her. And the scary part of all this is the fact that this young man was raped. There was no apology. There was no understanding or no respect. We can see here that this young woman was never even addressed. They, Hammer, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and Shechem went to talk to Jacob and told Jacob that, Shechem wants to marry Dinah after raping her. And you see here, what's interesting is that when Jacob first learned of what transpired, he held his peace. He held his peace. He waited for his sons to come back from the field and to talk to them. It didn't say that Jacob was angry. It didn't say that he felt disrespected. He didn't feel like, and I can't help but wonder if the reason why he held his peace is because that Dinah was not the daughter of Rachel, his favorite wife, but the daughter of Leah, the woman he hated. Maybe because he really didn't like, Leah, and therefore that really translated into him not really loving his daughter Dinah. I know it's something that many people are not, mentioning, because I've heard, pastors preach on this passage many times, but I've never heard them mentioning the fact that, Jacob hated Leah. So therefore, it's pretty clear that Jacob did not, care enough for Dinah to protect her in any way. Maybe if Dinah had been Rachel's daughter, things would have turned out differently. And to make matters worse, he was not outraged. The text didn't say he was angry. It didn't say he felt any type of way. It simply said that he held his peace until his sons came home from the field where they were working. So now we are learning that once Dinah's brothers heard of what happened to Dinah, they were outraged. They were livid. They felt insulted. And the brothers were not going to hold their peace like their father, Jacob, was doing. Because we hear that as soon as the brothers heard of what transpired, the moment they heard the news, they expressed that such a thing should never be done in Israel. And really, it was the first time we even heard the nation of Israel being named Israel, in reference of them being God's chosen people. And they were like, no, this should not be done. It should not be done. We are talking about, something that is like, it's a heinous crime. You know what I mean? And we know, according to Middle Eastern custom, that a young woman being defiled meant that this young woman is no longer seen as valuable, that this young woman is now being seen as a prostitute, even though it had nothing to do with her. It wasn't her who chose to give herself away. When a young woman is defiled, it's a disgrace to her and to her whole family. And the brothers understood that. While her father held his tongue, he held his peace. And, I don't know how the mother felt. I'm sure that Leah felt devastated. That was her baby girl. To know that such a thing happened to your child, it's just horrific. I can't imagine someone defiling my daughter. I have a 10-year-old daughter. I can't imagine someone defiling her, humiliated her like that, hurt her like that, and for me to hold my peace. I would not be holding my peace. But again, like I keep on saying to you ladies, don't get yourselves involved with men who really don't like you. And I'm going to tell you, people don't have to tell you they don't like you for you to know that they don't like you. Pay attention to their behavior. I'm pretty sure it was very clear to Leah that Jacob hated her. Even in Genesis chapter 33, the way that Jacob took every single precaution when he was strategizing on how they were going to meet Esau, we learned that he put the servant concubines and their children first, which means these children were not as important to him, okay? He put them first because if something were to happen, if Esau had, decided to kill them all, those servants and their children would have been murdered first. They were just collateral damage to him. And then we learned that he put Leah right after that and her children, meaning these children were not as important. But his favorite, his beloved, Rachel, and his favorite child, Joseph, because Joseph was Jacob's favorite child because Joseph was Rachel's son. Okay, and he put them in last just in case something goes wrong, so they will have the opportunity to escape. His behavior made it very clear to Leah. Leah already knew she was hated. But now to know that your daughter suffers because your husband does not really like you, my goodness, that must have been terrible for Leah. But then listen to this. The brothers were outraged. They're angry. But then we learned that Hamor and Shechem came to talk to Jacob, proposing a treaty of peace between Jacob's family and the people of the land. Now, mind you, the text here didn't say that they offered an apology. It didn't say that they, even addressed Dinah, because really women were not giving such an importance. At the time, women were only there to just breed children, to marry men and breed their children. That was really a woman's position. To save her virginity, to be married off, and breed children for her husband. But no one cared to ask how Dinah was doing. Nobody even asked. They didn't care. These men, were arrogant. Now, that young man, Shechem, is not only, arrogant, he's also a rapist. And he thinks that, I deserve this. I want this young woman. Who cares how she feels about it? I'm going to marry her. And then they went to talk to her father, Jacob. And Jacob invited them to into his home and talk to them. Craziness. And then we learned that they proposed a treaty of peace between Jacob's family and them and the land. And then they invited Jacob's sons to marry their daughters. And they too can marry Jacob's daughters. Now we're learning how little importance women really had, because the reason why we are learning of the name of Dinah is because she was raped. Now we know the name of the 12 sons. Oh, at this point it's 11 sons of Jacob. And then one of his daughters named Dinah, but no one mentioned that he, of all of his other daughters, because Jacob had many other daughters. But women were not that important. Nobody cared. But then these men are like, oh, it's okay. We can marry your daughters and you can marry the women of our land, and we will share all of our wealth together, and we'll do business together. We live together in harmony and peace. Never mind that this terrible tragedy just happened to this young woman. Her father, did not even, he didn't say anything as to what they are even proposing here. What's scary about this whole thing is the fact that Jacob is very well aware of the covenant that he has with God. And he's very well aware that he cannot allow his daughters to just marry off to just anybody, and for his sons to be married off to just anybody, because that will threaten the covenant. You see, that will threaten the covenant that God had made with Jacob and his father Isaac and his grandfather, Abraham. It's a threat to that covenant. But it seems to me that Jacob didn't take all of that into consideration, which is God. He knew very well that he couldn't do that. You can't agree to marry off your sons to the sons of the Canaanites, because we have to remember when Esau, Jacob's brother, married the Canaanite, daughters, the two women, how difficult they made, Isaac and Rebekah's lives. Jacob witnessed it. He saw it firsthand. Hence why his parents sent him to Laban to find a wife. Because we have to remember our custom, our way of living, our standards, our values, they matter. And the values and the standards and the custom of the people we are choosing to marry, if they do not align, you are unequally yoked. And Jacob really was endangering the covenant by agreeing to such a term. He was being very much irresponsible to agree to such a treaty. I will say this, one thing I found that I really enjoy about reading Genesis is how, honest and blunt and straight to the point Moses, the writer of Genesis, is. He does not mince his words. He let us know exactly what, the behaviors, the things that took place, at the time. He did not try to go around the bush with it. He made it very clear, from the beginning, this is, we were created perfect and this is what we did and so forth. And, Moses is making it so clear here in this chapter of how we as human beings, we are just plain wicked. Okay. So to make things even more interesting, we learned that Shechem offered to pay any bride price to Jacob, just so he could marry Dinah. And I'm sure they probably thought they were being generous, right? Like, oh, well, they acted as if money and marriage could really make, the disgrace go away, could really take away this trauma, this traumatic thing that just happened to this young woman. But interestingly enough, it wasn't even Jacob who answered. Jacob agreed to the arrangement, but then his sons pretended to agree to the arrangement. They pretended to accept it. They're like, sure, we would marry your daughters and you can marry ours on one condition. And since Shechem had mentioned that he was willing to pay any price to marry Dinah, now it gave Dinah's brothers an opportunity to really scheme against Hamor and his son Shechem and their whole city. We learned that the sons of Jacob said to, Hamor, we can't marry your your daughters because you guys are not circumcised, and we cannot, your men are not circumcised, and we cannot allow our daughters to be married to your daughters without your male, every male in your city be circumcised. And we learned that Hamor agreed to the terms. And you might wonder, why in the world would anyone agree to that? We're talking about circumcision here of grown men. Just painful. I'm sure the Canaanites were aware of circumcisions. I mean, they live in big cities and they're aware that different groups of people, were circumcising their male. They were circumcising their every male in their communities. They're aware of the practice, but they themselves did not practice that. They didn't practice that. For a group of men to agree to such a practice, it will mean that they'll have something very great to gain out of it. It's not only the women they were getting out of this whole, agreement. They were also, interested in the fact that they were going to make a lot of money. There was going to be great businesses between those two groups. And everything Jacob owns will also be theirs, you see. So they allowed their greed to take the best of them. So they're like, oh, sure, this is great. This is a great agreement. And then they went ahead to their people. They returned to their people and they convinced the men of their cities to also get circumcised by presenting, this beautiful package deal. We're going to make money and we're going to do things together. Their herds will be our herds. Their money will be our money. Their lands will be our land. We can do this together. And the men of their cities agreed to the terms as well. And they decided to get circumcised right away. They did not even delay. See, this here should teach us a lesson. How sometimes we just, the devil can come and trick you. Because we can see here, the sons of Jacob, they did not intend on allowing their sister to marry, Shechem. They certainly did not intend on having their daughters, to marry, the Canaanite men. That was not their intention. Their intention was to deceive these men. And we learned that 3 days later, after these men had endured circumcisions, that means they were in a lot of pain. Remember the foreskin is being removed of their penis. Oof. And these men were in extreme pain. And two of Jacob's sons, Levi and Simeon, decided to go and attack the city with swords. And they killed all the men that were circumcised. While these men were weak, they couldn't get up and fight because they were in pain. They just decided to kill them all. And they did that. Which tell us that it wasn't only Levi and Simeon who did it. They must have had their own group of men, you know what I mean, like who work with them. Because I'm sure it wasn't only two men who did it. I mean, it's a whole city. Yes, these men were weak, that's true. But they too have their own people who work for them. Just like Jacob has his own group of people, his sons are now leaders as well. They own their own herds. They're doing their own thing. These men also, we can see that they're old enough to have their own wives, their own lives. So they have their own people, their own servants. And they went out and they killed all these men who were circumcised. And they killed Hamor and they killed Shechem and they took Dinah back with them. Now we have to remember, poor Dinah. That young woman's life is ruined. She would never be married again, never have bear her own children, would not have a life of her because she has been defiled, you see. And to make matters worse, they plundered the city. Not only did they kill every male, they plundered the city. They took all these men's wives, their children, and enslaved them and turned them into servants and concubines. All their animals, all of their possessions. Now, I understand that they were angry that their sister was defiled. I get that. But to kill all these men, the punishment did not fit the crime. They could have asked for Shechem to be killed because he was the rapist, but to kill all these men under false pretenses, pretending that they were going to do great business, they were going to have a peace treaty, and then they lied. I'm telling y'all, the devil is a liar. The devil can trick you, make you believe that you're gonna have great possessions, make everything look shiny, seem shiny. You thinking, oh, there goes gold. Sometimes we fall for the trap of the devil. We have to be careful. We have to stop and think. If something seems too good to be true, more often than not, it is too good to be true. And because these men did not stop and think, they went ahead and got themselves circumcised. Craziness. Because in hope of getting money and wealth and all of that. Craziness. And they got themselves killed, and every man in the city killed, and now their wives and children are slaves and concubines. Craziness. That's really, that is just such a tragedy. Such a tragedy. But what got me was the fact that when Jacob learned of what had transpired, what happened, he didn't seem to show any care or concern for these men. I mean, yes, they were not perfect men. Yes, they were, they were not servants of God, but at the end of the day, they're still children of God. Their lives matter. But Jacob was not concerned about that. Jacob answered, his concern was only for himself and the danger that his sons now had just put him and his family in. He was concerned, he was fear of retribution. He did not say, oh my God, what have you done? You killed all these innocent men. This is just wrong. He did not, ask God for forgiveness for his sons. He simply was concerned about his own well-being and the danger of being, of retribution against him and his family, because their family was not as large as these surrounding nations, because remember, they were living near the city, but there were all these other group of people living around them. And that is just wrong. I mean, you're not concerned for the death of all these men and their wives being taken as slaves and servants and concubines, and their children being enslaved and all their possessions taken? Come on. Surely, that will be anybody's first concern, I would hope. But what got me is the fact that Jacob didn't seem to understand that him being unfaithful and lying and being a deceiver has really passed down, into his own son. His deceitful nature was clearly present in his sons, because his sons even deceived him by claiming, that they were okay with the treaty, the peaceful treaty, and when they were not, they were deceitful. They deceived these men. They watched their father even, lie to their uncle Esau, but by not following through on his promise of going to the land of Sir, and by going somewhere else and moving himself to, Shechem and buy a land and build there. They've watched that. Children learn by our example. We can tell them whatever we want. We can run around here and tell our children to do right, to not lie, to be truthful. But if we are lying, if we are being deceitful, if we are, doing things that are contrary to what we are saying, trust and believe that your children will follow suit. I was talking to a woman not too long ago who told me that she really wants her daughter to be married someday. She's like, that's something I will always want. And I asked her how she intend on having, her daughter to be married. when she herself is, cohabiting with a man she's not married to? I mean, you have to think about it, right? If you are living in sin and you okay with that, you okay with just shacking up with some man and you're not showing that example of what a pure, beautiful marriage looks like, why should your child do any differently? How are they gonna learn if you've never shown them? That's our job as parents. Now, we don't have to be perfect, but we have to be mindful of our behavior and how our behaviors can affect our children. I fall short every day. There are many things that I wish I haven't done. I wish that I can do better and I'm working on. But nevertheless, I'm cognizant of that. And I try to follow the rules more than not, especially when it comes to being with my children. Because if we are not honest with self, we can't be honest with others. Jacob was not honest with himself. He lied. He deceived. He deceived his father and sold his brother's birthright. He deceived himself, and of course he himself was deceived, and he lied again to his brother. All of that, his children were paying attention, and now his kids are also deceivers. And we can see here Jacob's refusal to do what was right in regards to his family, what was right in regards to his daughter, caused two of his sons to destroy a whole group of people. And that is scary. That is very scary. That is very, very scary. Such a horrific crime. His daughter suffered, but all these men, my goodness, the punishment did not fit the crime. Now, had Jacob handled the matter properly, we would not have been reading this story like that. It would have, had he handled it and protected his daughter, or demanded some kind of punishment to that young man, instead of giving his daughter to her own rapist, things would have turned out differently. We have to remember, when God appoints us to be the head of a family, we have to take that role seriously. And we have to be willing to approach problems and deal with problems, head on, and not try to avoid things, and not try to, to have excuses, but to handle things. Because he did not handle his leadership appropriately, and that create, that opened up a space for sin to live in, and now his sons were murderers. That is scary. I see so many of our men who are not willing to step up and take the lead in their families, and somehow they expect their families to be okay. How? As men, if you are men listening to this, you have a huge responsibility to lead your family, to protect your family. It's a gift. God gave you a gift. Handle it well. Because if you don't, it creates space for sin to come in and move in and live into your whole family. This story is so tragic, such a horrific story. And we know that these men, Levi and Simeon, they are, part of the Israelites, like God used all 12 tribes for his own glory. But my goodness, this is, it goes to show that none of us are perfect. These men were men. They were men. And oftentimes they did not behave according to the way that God wanted them to behave, even though, Jacob was the one who was chosen to carry out the covenant. There are often times where he fell short, and it's okay. Just like you and I will be falling short often. It's okay, but we have to remember to go back and redeem ourselves. We have to remember to go back and repent. We have to repent. We must repent. We must repent. So I hope you learned something from this chapter this week. I know I did. Stop and think. Don't just go in head on and deal with people when you don't really know their full intentions. Go to God. I mean, Jacob could have gone to God and pray God. I mean, after all, he had built an altar for God. He could have used that altar. When he first heard of what had happened to his daughter, he should have handled it correctly. Go to God and ask for direction. Show some anger. I would. Anger is a normal emotion. It's a valid emotion for certain situations. He could have handled it differently, but he didn't. And that caused all this chaos. When we don't handle sin properly, we all suffer. Society as a whole suffer. So I hope you and I learned something from this chapter this week. I hope that, if you have any questions, concerns, leave them below. I want to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. I appreciate you. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you. And I'm looking forward to reading Genesis chapter 35 with you next week, which will be the last chapter for this season, the season of the podcast. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll have a marvelous upcoming week. Until next time, darlings. Bisous.